I'll give you this little forward here. I approach this from the ethical lens. We're going to talk about that quite a bit, obviously, for the context of this presentation. But what I'm really interested in, what I want to present here, it's not going to be a step-by-step model for how to do a suicide assessment. You're not going to be hearing about the 5 stages of grief. Hands, who knows that model? Heard of that model? We're not going to do any of that. What I want us to lean into today is getting more comfortable approaching people from the human experience and the ethics of supporting them holistically, as opposed to just going through a series of questions, because that seems to be our ethical or legal responsibility. Okay? Does that make you apprehensive? Excited? Somewhere in the middle? All right. Okay, so a little bit of the agenda. I'm going to talk about my background a little bit and my passions. We're going to touch on some counseling ethical touchstones. I won't go too far into those because they can be pretty verbose and not applicable to everybody in the room, as well as the Danielson touchstones. And then this is what I'm really going to get into, my passions and my stuff. And I pace a lot, but then you're going to see me like crouch, do things with my hands. This is very important to me. Suicide and NSSI. Any guesses on what NSSI is? Well, stay tuned. We'll learn a lot about it. And then we have a case study at the very end for us to unpack some of the ethical pivotal points that might come up for you. Oh, my head's really big when you get on this really big screen, especially when I'm this close. Okay, so a little bit about me. I, again, have been here for 2 years with the Department of Counseling and Human Services, and prior to that, I was at Indiana University in South Bend for 8 years, right? Do I have any Midwestern origins here? Where about?
West side of Chicago.
Chicago, you're really close to us. Yeah?
Central Illinois.
Okay. Yes?
Nebraska.
Nebraska, very nice. No northern Minnesotas like myself?
Michigan.
The Minton.
My sister went to IU.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
And the Bloomington campus? Yeah. There's another famous university in South Bend.
Never heard. No.
We don't speak of. I'm just gonna skip it. We're not gonna say it. I'm not even gonna say go Irish. I'm gonna say go Mountain Lions. Okay. A little bit of my clinical experience. So while I pursued, after my master's program, while I pursued my doctorate, I actually worked here in Colorado. My doctorate was at UNC Greeley, up the hill a little bit, or up the road, I-25 all the way up. And I worked in the Denver suburb area, as well as up in the Weld County area, in crisis shelters for people that were fleeing intimate partner violence. I should have made that a quiz question. Intimate partner violence is what IPV stands for. Previously known as what? Domestic abuse. Yes, why is it not known that way now?
Not everyone lives together.
You don't have to live together to be in an abusive relationship. Okay? So these are crisis shelters where people that are actually fleeing physical violence, sexual violence, emotional violence. I've seen and heard more than I ever was prepared to about what human beings can do to one another, what they can inflict on one another. Okay, so my interest in trauma work really stemmed from here. I also worked in an alternative high school. This was back in Minnesota during my master's program. And we served individuals that had dropped out of public education for things like teen pregnancy, addiction, incarceration. There were lots of different variables that took them out of the mainstream culture. We also had a high immigrant population, especially from what was labeled to be war-torn countries. So actually working with people who were learning English for the first time, and also were covered in scars, literal scars, emotional scars, physical scars, from some of the battles that they had ensued. Anybody heard of BetterHelp? What about Talkspace? Sondermind?
I was here like after that, like on my podcast. Is that BetterHelp?
Yes. Well, there's many of them. I'm a big fan of BetterHelp just because I've been working there since 2018. Right? It's an online counseling platform. You saw the fancy letters at the end of my name. I'm a board certified telemental health provider. So I was doing telemental health before we had to. Is long and short of that. So I see a small caseload, about 5 clients a week. And if you can see the funnel down effect here, my professional passions, I'm really interested in grief and loss. Grief and loss is what I consider a human condition. It's a universal experience. Right? Even if you were to raise your hand right now saying, I've never lost a person, we know that's an inevitable outcome of our life here on this planet. Okay, we're gonna talk about the textures of grief and loss as well. I really lean into trying to address grief and loss before a physical death happens. I talk about it here, but I push back on the cards and casserole time. Okay? We have a physical death, we burn cards, we burn casseroles. We're black in many of our cultures, some we do not. But there's so much that happens before that that we don't pay enough attention to. And also trauma recovery, including the positive aspects of trauma. Did you know that trauma can actually be a catalyst for further growth, for further extended functioning in life? Some of you are nodding, some of you like crossed your eyes at me, like that's not true, that can't be true. Okay, post-traumatic growth, have you ever heard of that before? All right, thinking about what we've endured in life and how that's changed our perspective and how we are relating to our world and within our worldview. Questions about me and my giant face? Yes?
How, when you were going through your doctorate or before that, how is it that you ended up, what made you go into grief and loss?
Great story. When I was in my master's program, I lost my father to a very acute and aggressive cancer. That from moment of prognosis and notification that he was ill, he died 4 months later. And I remember that being a very quiet, very lonely, very confusing 4 months. And that actually gets into, well, we have to talk about ethics first, but anticipatory grief. Have you heard that term before? Doesn't get a lot of attention. So I became captivated with this idea of what was happening for me, and I know this exists other places. Let's talk about it further. So that became the focal point of my dissertation study.
And as you were going through your studies, is there a lot of support for this track in education?
For learning about the different grief experiences?
Yes.
Not necessarily.
Okay.
If you've heard of, because you're psychology, right? Association for Death Education and Counseling is a great organization. They helped me quite a bit with my dissertation research. But we talk a lot, especially in fields of helping, about things that happen post-death. Once a death happens, we have an event, we can move forward. There's so much more that I want to talk about today, so hopefully it'll be novel and new. Okay, getting into our counseling principles, I'm just going to pull, I don't know why I put animations on everything. I think I just like the power of clicking. I'm just going to pull them all up here. Oop. And I'm really close to the screen. The things such as avoiding harm, trying to limit or at least understand our personal values and how we might be approaching our own grief experiences, our own issues of trauma, and try to remove those from conversations or relationships with other people. Respecting confidentiality, I'm not going to share anything that I don't legally have to share with anybody, even when we talk about suicide ideation. Okay, there's a lot of fear around somebody saying, I have suicidal thoughts. Okay, there's a knee-jerk reaction to I want to be able to respond, I have to refer. QPR does a lot of that, right? Yeah. Thinking about minimal disclosure, only telling if I do have to bring in another party, a minimal amount, the very least amount necessary. Always thinking about how that disclosure will affect the client's welfare. And this is school counseling. So in our master's program for our 2 accredited with KCREP programs, we have clinical mental health, which is really guided by ACA, and then we have our school counseling program. So I put both of these into this presentation. We talk about these in classes. So very similarly, confidentiality, sustaining relationships, and maintaining boundaries. Okay, there's a way to be supportive in the hard stuff, the tough stuff, but also keep yourself safe. Okay, there's a way to go all in without giving yourself. There's a way to hold pain in space, and then when you walk out of that conversation, that relationship for that moment, you allow that person to take that with them. Okay, it takes practice, it takes a lot of conversation and supervision. Collaboration, advocacy, and referrals if necessary, and see serious and foreseeable harm to self or others. We're not going to talk about homicidal ideation in here, but when we lean into the different types of ideations with suicide, there are many times this person is not actually intending to die. That's not their desire, that's not their wish. So I'm going to help you, I'm going to teach you, and then you're going to absolutely absorb it, how to not be spooked at the idea of ideation. And can we lean in and sit a bit further on the details of such? I know y'all wrote down the A's and the 5s and the B's. I'm gonna look those up later. Placate me, just not. Okay, so our Daniel's Fund ethical principles. Is it okay that I used his face? Too late now, there he is.
Yeah.
All right.
Otherwise, you just think he's just, I mean, he's right there.
Yep, here he is. Oh, I don't even need a slide for this. Here we go. So thinking about our Daniels Fund ethical principles. So I did try to go make you all a handout of all this PowerPoint with this information on it. The printer's not working right now in my department. But you're gonna need these for the case study. So if you just wanna remember, you wanna jot notes.
Well, and they're right there.
And they're right there. Yes. So thinking about integrity, so acting with honesty. I just put summaries here for space sake. Trust, building into all stakeholder relationships, whether the people that you work with, the people that you serve, the people that you mentor. Accountability, accepting responsibility for information or any type of dialogue that might be happening where you have a specific point of authority, perhaps. Transparency, this is really big for me. I'm a big fan as a counselor of self-disclosure. And what do you think when you hear the word self-disclosure from a counselor? What are they saying?
Their own personal experiences?
No. But that's exactly what everybody else is going to say as they're about to raise their hands. Self-disclosure, the ethical way that we use self-disclosure, or should use self-disclosure, is sharing with somebody how I am feeling in response to what they're sharing or what I'm experiencing. It's not my story. I call it the 90%, 10% rule of thumb in Kylie land. I call it Kylie-isms a lot. 10% of the time I'm telling them a chunk of my story. 90% of the time I might be saying, Morgan, when you shared that piece about your family, I found myself holding my chest. I felt myself flush. I'm feeling angry with you. I'm feeling pain with you. I'm joining into this experience with you. That is self-disclosure because it is your experience. Okay? Fairness in any type of competition and equitable relationships. Respect, honoring the rights and the views of others in all capacities. And the rule of law, complying with spirit and intention when any type of legislation may be in place. And lastly, viability. So creating long-term value in the relationships that you make with stakeholders, that you work with professionally and also personally. Think about how we ethically enter into the arena with each other. Got it? Still with me? Yes, you have to be. You can't leave. It's really hard to leave right now, actually, for some of you here. So for my project activities, a couple of these have happened and one other one is still in place. So I was the keynote speaker for our professional development day on campus in September. So that involves all of our new admits for our master's program, as well as site supervisors from within the community and current students. So I think we had about 100 people or so there. So my title was Growth and Grief, Ethical Perspectives for Holistic Counseling, and we're going to talk a lot about those parts today. So that's said and done. Intimidating, fun, learned a lot. Also, I'm teaching the Crisis, Trauma, and Disaster Work course. I taught both sections this summer, and I'm teaching both sections right now, so we have about 50 students in the two classes combined. And I'm really leaning into suicide assessment strategies that extend beyond QPR. Okay, so QPR training really gets into those questions. We got to get through, we got to get the information, we have to refer, we have to respond. All right, I'm teaching them how to lean into that interpersonal experience more. And there it is, there's the definition. NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury. Okay, very different than suicidal ideation. And we're gonna unpack that. Lastly, just returned on Sunday. Flight was canceled from Denver to Colorado Springs. That was a fun little journey. There's a lot of pilots in the room. Like, we could have come pick you up. That would have been great. We were at Coeur d'Alene in Idaho and presented 2 different times. So along with 2 other teaching fellows, or ethics fellows, sorry. So anybody know Dr. Studi, Dr. Stark in the room? Probably? Yeah, fantastic. So I work with Dr. Studi in pet therapy research. I'm actually an investigator or a researcher in that process. We've written 2 manuscripts here. And with Dr. Stark, trauma-informed decision-making ethical principles, we presented on this 4 times now. So we're excited about this, and I think this was her project. Okay. All right, ethics, got it, nailed it. Ready to talk about grief? Yes, ma'am.
Real quick, count 5550, is that undergrad or grad?
That is graduate, yep. Graduate, yep. It's a required class for our clinical mental health and school counselors in their first year.
Do you offer it in the spring?
Just in the fall. It used to be offered in the summer, but we shifted it to a full academic semester. It was just too condensed in a 4-week session. Yeah. They were leaving like this. after every class. And then I taught both sections, so I was leaving like that sometimes too. So yes, now offer Duval. All right, here we go. Ready? Anticipatory grief. Experience between the knowledge, the awareness of an impending loss prior to the actual physical death. Okay. There are 3 layers to this though, and this is what makes it so unique. There's a past emotional and physiological, or past emotional psychological loss, a present and a future. All right. What's an example of a past memory that might come up for somebody when they've lost somebody, or they're thinking about this person dying soon? They might think about that birthday party we last had, that last fishing trip, something like that. You have those past lost memories in post-death bereavement as well. The present one is what makes this so unique. Okay. The first diaper I ever changed, I was 24 and it was my father. Okay. There's a loss of mobility. We're thinking about terminal illness, brain injury, cancers. There's loss of function. There's loss of memory. Working with people that have aging parents, maybe suffering from dementia, Alzheimer's. That present loss is very, very painful and also very silented. We don't talk enough about that, so we're doing it today. And of course, future, I'm thinking about this person won't walk me down the aisle. This person won't be able to meet my children in the future. They won't see me graduate. Okay, those 2 bookends do happen with post-death bereavement. But any feedback or just thoughts on thinking about present loss with anticipatory grief? I know that's a novel idea for a lot of people.
What I'm thinking is like, what if you have like a lot of anxiety, like around, like just being like a new parent or something like that, and just being a mother, like always being fearful that you could have an accident, for example.
Yeah, I think with parenthood, worked with a lot of parents, have a lot of friends that are parents. It talks about after the birth, you spend the rest of your life with your heart beating outside of your body. I think is the way it's phrased often. Not necessarily anticipatory grief though, just more of a normalized parenting experience. Anyone else? Yeah.
To me, it strikes me as kind of, I don't want to say preparatory, but it's a way of almost dealing with something before it happens in a way that, like your example, the shock of something happening very quickly doesn't give that preparatory space.
Correct. Yeah.
So you're kind of forced into only a past sort of grief. Like, well, this has already happened now, I gotta figure out what to do.
Yeah. And some people, if chosen, some people prefer that way. And some people would say, I'd rather be shocked than go through anticipatory grief because they can be so complex.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna ask, if there's a level of anxiety that you stop living in the present, because you're just thinking about, even if you're not thinking about the future at times when they're not there, you're just living in the present, so just this anxiety of losing them.
Yes.
You know, versus living with them while you still have them, you know?
Yes.
Would this be different than like just having anxiety over loved ones dying? Not like this would be specific to like hearing a diagnosis or something like that someone actually would be passing away?
Yes. Yes. We have death anxiety in general as human beings. We can't get rid of that. It goes up and down over time. But yes, it would be there's some type of notification that this person's life is limited.
Can you flip those notions and take it from your dad's perspective instead of your perspective? Are those still the sort of losses that he's dealing with as well?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there was not a lot of cognitive communication. Again, 4 months before we even knew he was ill, for 2 months he was not able to verbally communicate at all. So there would be something I could figure out. But those 5 stages of grief, remember those? Did you know that those were originally researched and defined by interviewing people that were dying themselves? Not for people that were grieving. It's a common assumption this is a grief model. It's not. It's a dying model. Okay. So I think that experience is very unique. Right. Going back to Morgan, your point, I don't have a slide on this. I'm keeping an eye on time. I'm a verbose person, Tracy. She's keeping me on it. Hospice. What's the point of hospice? What's the mission of hospice? To to give people the dying experience that they want.
To make them comfortable.
Palliative care?
Also to help support the family through that.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe like to avoid the stress of hospital visits.
Try to be in your own
Try to
space.
Make it on your terms.
More private. When does hospice care come into place?
6 months before death.
What do you need for that?
A doctor's
terminal diagnosis.
You have to have a doctor that literally signs a piece of paper saying this person is 6 months or less. In my dissertation research, I interviewed 130 adults who had an anticipated loss in their life. 43% of them had received prognosis from a doctor. Okay. So 6 months or less is ideal. Any guess on the average length of stay nationally in the US for hospice care?
6 weeks.
2 years. 24 days. Okay. So there's a gap here. There's a gap in our communication with our medical system. There's also a gap in our understanding of how to support families and individuals in this space. Okay? So that traditional, in anticipatory experiences, that traditional transactional support system is delayed. Right? That's when I said cards and casseroles. People aren't bringing cards and casseroles wearing black when somebody has a prognosis of less than a year to live. So my encouragement is for all of you thinking from an ethical lens. Don't wait for the death to acknowledge the pain. Okay, this is speaking to you as family members, as friends, as professionals, as mentors, because the pain is already there. Okay. Reframes are often, sorry, I have a glare here and I'm very close, are not necessary and often unhelpful. Okay. I would keep posing open questions if that's how I teach, but I'm keeping an eye on time too. So what I mean by reframe is, saying something like, well, they're going to be in a better place. They're going to be out of pain now. Think about all the time you did have. At least you know. Okay, they're intended to be helpful, but oftentimes have the reverse effect on that person's experience. It's dismissive. So witnessing the anguish of the unknown. So nonverbal expressions. And this is meant for counselors to really grasp probably more than a lot of people in the room, but avoid letting your face and body speak before you do. Somebody show me, all of you show me, you can participate or not because nobody else will know. Show me what sympathy looks like on your face. Got like 3 participants, it's fine. Show me what empathy looks like. Not a lot of difference. No matter what somebody is going through in anticipatory grief, they're not going to gravitate towards sympathy. Okay? It's not going to be an instinct to do that. It's usually about, this person feels pain for me, so now I'm all of a sudden comforting them. Or I'm making light of the pain that I'm going through. Because sympathy can be painful for the other party as well. Okay, moving on, Tracy. Anybody heard of this word before? Disenfranchised grief. Okay, this is a big deal. I might spend time on this one. So this is grief not collectively recognized or validated by larger societal supports in relation to the loss. It's also called marginalized grief. Okay, this is a really big deal. So if this is one of the takeaways, I hope you get it. Examples: miscarriage, stillbirth, abortion, deployment, death of a pet, missing people, including missing in action, suicide, overdose, divorce, loss of an abusive partner, incarceration, loss of mobility or loss of health, departure from a religious community, maybe how you were raised, loss of possessions. Okay. What's going on for you within your body, within your mind, as you read this list and soak this in?
It's a lot of understanding personal experiences and realizing that in those moments of being upset and then realizing that it was disenfranchised because other people didn't view it as you shouldn't be upset or you shouldn't be this upset or that it's not that big of a deal compared to someone actually
A parent dying.
yes, exactly.
Exactly. Yeah. Great. These are the things not collectively recognized, but exceptionally painful for individuals. I'm a huge dog person. Sorry, I touched your screen. Huge dog person. When I lost my first fur baby unexpectedly to a autoimmune issue we didn't know she had, I was in complete mourning. I was bereaved. I was bereft. I was lucky that was spring break week because I just sat and cried and watched reality television and wrote notes to all the vets and took pictures of her, and it was a process. But thinking about something like that, if you're not necessarily an animal person, or that's not something that's very centralized to you, how that's dismissed in greater populations. We don't get days off for death of a pet. We don't get bereavement time for a miscarriage. Okay? When we think about a lot of these things, such as divorce, don't talk about it. Let's distract. Let's do something else. Let's get you on a dating app. Right? That's what we collectively tend to do. Okay? This is something important that you might notice in your cadets or with other people in your lives. So repressed mourning, so these things that are not universally recognized or they're able to talk about openly can often ache in physiological ways. These people can have a lot of issues with sleep. They can become physically ill. Okay? I love this quote by Henry Maudsley. The sorrow which cannot find a vent for tears may cause other organs to weep. Okay, so that mind-body connection is very powerful and very strong when it comes to grieving. Okay, so encouragements for you. Avoiding assumptions about the significance of that loss. All right, going back to even loss of an abusive partner. You've been with that person for many years. That's a loss. It's a major change in your life. Divorce, you're better off without them. That's a loss. Okay? So lean into that supportive curiosity. Tell me how it's going. What's going on for you now? What's it like to go to bed at night? Those are supportive, ethically holistic questions to pose to people. Offer opportunity to disclose without direction. So this is, again, a little bit more counseling oriented. Like, if you go and you take this person out, have in your mind that you're trying to interact with them and get to know them and meet them where they are, as opposed to trying to distract them. We can say, you can talk about any part of this with me that you want to, but you don't have to talk about anything you don't want to either. That's not me. That's a bell from Tracy probably.
I don't know.
Okay. Emotion is empathy. Write that down and remember that. Emotion is empathy. You do not have to go through something similar to have empathy and supportive compassion for somebody else. All right? So somebody pick one from these lists. Somebody pick one of these events. Incarceration. Okay. What type of emotions might I be going through if my partner, my daughter, my parent is incarcerated? Let's go with 3. Sadness? Anger? Loneliness. Raise your hand if you've never experienced those 3 emotions. You can say something such as, I don't know what you're exactly going through. But, oh my gosh, I know loneliness. I know that anger, that helplessness. I know how that feels. That's empathy. You don't need to have the shared experience. That's events, that's content. All right? Okay. Growth can happen in grief. So an overview, I get to cite myself a couple of times on this slide, which is pretty fun. So recognizing it, acknowledging that the goal of recovery post an actual loss, whether it be a disenfranchised loss or a physical death, it doesn't need to get back to normal. Don't use that word. All right? Get back to the previous state of functioning. We don't need to do that. Okay? We can actually advance past that previous state of functioning. And oftentimes, it is the inevitable outcome. All right? I shared with my students after that loss of my father, he left a some finances available for me and my siblings to attend education. Further our education, specifically for that reason. I wouldn't have had my doctorate if it wasn't for that. Okay. I met new people. I moved out of Minnesota after 26 years. You know, there are a lot of things that happened. Would I choose for him to still be here? Yeah, I would. Okay. But there is post-death growth as well. So also learning of that anticipated loss, so that terminal illness perhaps with a family member, has been significantly identified as a traumatic experience, first of all. Oftentimes we think trauma only happens after something is done, event passed. Learning of that illness can be a traumatic experience, and you can also experience growth during that time that they're still alive. Okay. And there's my little citations. Email me if you want their full references. One of them's a dissertation, you don't want to read that. Okay, so my encouragements for you. Stop using the language, we need to move on. We need to forget this. We need to just forget them. All right? We make room. We make room for the absence, we make room for new opportunities, but we don't move on them. None of these things leave us. Okay? And also, I know I mentioned this before, but distraction and self-care are very different things. If you're supporting somebody by distraction, please lean into being open to conversation as well. We need to get your mind off it. It comes from a positive intention, but I'm so much in pain right now. I need to be acknowledged for that too. Proactive coping, anybody heard of that term before? Fairly novel, 2007, I believe. I'm dating myself, some of you might have just been born around that time. This is an idea of we can know something imminent is happening. We can pool our resources. We can go to counseling. We can read some books. We can talk to our best friends. We can take trips. We can do some of that unfinished business with a person that we might be losing soon. This is a skill that can be taught. This is a skill that can be implemented. It's not just a natural disposition. Okay. And lastly, culturally responsive support sometimes, I don't say often, but sometimes involves research before reaction. In some cultures, in some countries, in some communities, we have very, very different views on grief, very different views on death and dying. In some cultures throughout the world, this is celebrated. It's a party. That person's deceased body is on display for days. It's a celebration. For others, we mourn for up to a week. But we don't do certain things. There's agony. The first death notification I ever given some of my students as well, was the hardest of my professional career to date. It was at that alternative high school when one of my students, her 2 infant sons, and both her parents were killed in a distracted driving accident. And I showed up that next morning to the school. The principal met me outside, and I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. What do I do? Where are my notes? Told me what happened, and it was my job to inform all of that person's close friends of what happened, that they were dead. Okay. It would be multiple different countries and cultures represented in that friendship group. I'll never forget the audible sound of devastation that occurred there. Okay, the different ways that we respond to news like that can really stick with you. We remember, you know our 5 senses? Well, we have more than that. When it comes to trauma, do you know the number 1 that we remember more? Or sticks with us? Causes triggers? Smell is number 1. Number 2? What you hear. Number 3 is sight. Okay? So those things can come back very, very quickly for people. Thinking about this in the terms of grief and growth, this comes across as very differently depending on the culture within the room. Okay, here we go. Would you call yourselves, by show of hands, fairly familiar with suicide? All the terms, all the things? Anyone? Some of this is modesty in the room. Yeah, I raise my hand, I'm sure. There's a lot of terms here, and I want to unpack them because they're not all one and the same. Intent. Seems straightforward, but there's a lot of other words in here that you probably thought were the same. Intent means a desire to die. Ideation, you've heard that word a lot, yeah? I'm from Minnesota, I say yeah a lot. Can't help it. These are thoughts. 1 out of 20 people are having suicidal thoughts every given day and any given moment. There are more than 20 of us in this room. This happens often. It is common. Okay? Embracing this holistically with understanding and compassion is what I'm talking about now. Means, that is your method, and accessibility. Somebody give me an example of means when it comes to suicide.
Firearms.
Pills.
What is the most lethal method or mean? Firearms. What's second most lethal? Hanging. Hanging. So also one of the top ways that young children die by suicide is the little strands that are on the blinds in houses wrapped around, just leaning. Okay. Little ones die more by hanging than by fire. Plan. So the more specific the plan, the more imminent the ideation and the severity. Okay, a suicide attempt means this plan was carried out. The means were secured, the plan was carried out. Again, this seems a little straightforward. This is something that's not straightforward. Probably many of you have not heard this before. Completion, not committed. Why do I make that distinction? Why do I say completed suicide, not committed?
Because committed gives the idea of illegal, forgetting the word right now.
Committed a
Unlawful
crime.
acts.
Is it illegal to kill yourself? Probably startles some of you to think about it that way. Right? The intent of suicide is to end pain. That's where ideations come from. So we say completed suicide, not committed suicide. So even when we're talking to people that are survivors of suicide, they lost a brother, they lost a friend, they lost a parent, being cautious around the language that you're using. We even use the word successful suicide attempt because the intent was to die. That was the successful act. Okay. Ambiguity. Lots of people don't know this one either. This is somebody that says, I don't care if I live or die. Okay. These are individuals that might walk into traffic. I don't care if I live or die. If I'm getting a hit, I'm meant to get hit. People that might take a bunch of medications all at once, have no idea what they are. If I wake up, I do. If I don't, I don't. Okay, this can be very scary stuff. Very important to be able to hear that without jumping into questioning. Because you say, do you want to die? You're going to hear, I don't know. So can you tolerate that level of personal distress? NSSI, non-suicidal self-injury. Physical injury to the body, such as cutting, puncturing, or burning. But the big indicator that's different, sounds straightforward, and again it is. There's no intent to die with this. For those who have children, work with children, I work with a lot of school counselors, there's a lot of alarm when a kid discloses that they've been cutting. That's not an automatic, I call mom. Absolutely not. Not ethically. Ethically, we find out where intention is. We find out what's hurting. Not what they're doing, not how often they're doing it, but what's hurting. And what feels better? Ever considered asking that question before? What changes once this happens? Anything that has a maladaptive presence for you was once adaptive. Okay? Substance misuse, not on the slideshow, but that's another one. Somebody that's overusing or misusing substances, there was a moment in time where that potentially saved their life. Got them out of a pain that was so unbearable. It started adaptively. Stay present for that. Okay? These can be correlated. You're like, oh, Kylie, you said they're so different. Okay. Correlation and causation are different. Do we know the differences there? So correlated means, let's say, I have, maybe made an attempt before by slitting my wrists. Or I thought about that. That's my means. I've identified means. But I've also been using other objects to cut and puncture my body. Okay, there's a correlation with this, and there could be a severity of risk with this, but it's not causal. Meaning, if somebody is cutting, if they're puncturing, if they're burning, we cannot assume, and please don't assume, that they have any intention to ever try to attempt suicide. Okay? Jumping to that is probably the reason that most people do not talk about this anyway. Is that, I mean, confidentiality is key here, but any cadets experiencing self-injury that you know of, you've heard of? Any estimates of how much you think it might exist that we don't know about? We have military repercussions for mental health, right? There could be some pushbacks and limitations. Okay, lastly, thinking about you. This will be the takeaways, and then we'll wrap up with a case study. Ethical support of self. This is not just ethical support of other people, but ethical support of self. Knowing your own grief and fear of future loss. Okay? We are, in the Western world, especially the United States, we are a death-denying culture. We don't like to talk about death. We don't like to think about death. Know your stuff. Know how you relate to grief. Okay? This is going to save a lot of potential barrier that men have relating to other people as well. Oh, I say our unfinished business may drive direction and/or avoidance. So if we are death fearful, if we are grief fearful, and somebody that you're supporting is talking to you about a worry that they have or an illness that was just prognosed to a family member, anything's going on for them, if we are fearful of that, we're going to jump to distraction. We're going to say, we're going to change the topic. We're going to do something that takes us out of the same pain because we don't want to feel it. Psychoeducation or intervention, there's a lot of counseling words in here. Based on thanatology research rather than stereotypes or untested hypotheses, check your stereotypes. Are they based on something you saw, something you heard, or is it something you read? Or is it something you heard here? Okay? Cutting does not equal suicide, for example. Pushing back on some of the stereotypes you might have had with you. Understanding your own personal values, avoiding imposition. There's a lot of religious stereotypes when it comes to, or a religious stigma, not stereotypes, stigma when it comes to suicide ideation. Okay, well, if you do this, you're going to go to hell. So why would you do that? Let's choose not to do that. Okay, if that's not a fit, that can be very disarming. Enhancing your own transparency, your own trust, and your accountability to that person. If they're in pain and it does reach a place where they have the means, they have the plan, it's going to happen soon, be a friend, be an ally, be a mentor that helps them get the next stage of support, as long as we've leaned in and been able to be supportive ahead of time. And for helping others. Use open door questions or statements over specified questions. Okay? We love to fix pain in this country. We love to offer advice. We love to tell people what to do. Oh, I did this. Oh, my friend did that. This is a great therapist. This is somebody over here. We want to jump to, have you talked about this? What have you done? This is what people need in grief. They need you to say things like, I see you. I'm here. Right? Tell me what you need when you need it. Okay. Big fan of memes in the room? They matter. They're unspoken words of encouragement, just something this is thinking about you. Anything like that, those little acts of gesture can really, really support them in ethically embracing that holistic perspective. So again, leaning into your experience with what they're going through. If you're uncomfortable, or if something is really causing you pain, you're trying to dart your eyes because you're welling up, talk about it. Share with them. I'm fighting back my own tears, hearing your pain right now. Tell them that. It means they're impacting you. Their story matters to them. And lastly, be somebody they do not have right now. Okay? This goes for working with kiddos, adults, elderly populations. There's something they don't have. Can you be that person, even in a small scaffolding way? Be somebody they don't have. Maybe everybody else is giving advice and trying to fix pain. Can you be somebody that's not? Questions on the support process or comments here? This is it before case study time. I know we have till 1, right? Mm-hmm. We probably won't take a ton of time with this, but maybe about 5 to 10 minutes, just talking with people around you. Monica is a 23-year-old first-generation college student, and she identifies as a bisexual female. Pronouns she, her, hers. Monica's family is originally from Colombia and now reside in southern Arizona while she attends school in Colorado. Although they are supportive of her independence and achievements, Monica's parents do not accept or support non-heterosexual orientations, which has led Monica to concealing her relationships with women. 6 months ago, Monica's girlfriend, Rachel, was injured in an impaired driving accident. Rachel is now paralyzed from the chest down and requires full-time assistance to bathe and use the bathroom. Monica moved in with Rachel last month to help her with the consistent care she needs. Today, you meet Monica for lunch. You notice she has visible marks in between her fingers, and you ask her what's going on. She drops her head and starts to cry. She states that she's been using thumbtacks to puncture her skin when she feels overwhelmed with all that is going on at home. She then says, "It's not like I want to kill myself or anything, but I do sometimes wonder what it would look like to be gone and free from all of this." Okay. This is based on a real human. So with people close to you, just have a chat for a couple of minutes. What type of ethical principles are coming up? All the aspects of Bruce that we talked about, suicidal ideation versus non-suicidal self-injury. What's going on for you? So this is a little nerdy neurologically of me, but the mechanisms in our brain chemistry and the areas of our brain that are activated when we have physical pain and emotional or psychological pain are very, very intersected. They're almost identical. They're not fully identical, but they're almost identical. I tell my students, our brain doesn't know the difference between a broken leg and a broken heart. What? Can't write that down. This is a neurological fact though. So what happens a lot with non-suicidal self-injury, if my heart is broken, I can redirect something I can control by inflicting physical pain on my body. An overwhelming feeling, a sense of dissociation, being outside of oneself. This is very adaptively functional to feel something. Of course, we see alarm when we see somebody hurting their physical body. We gotta understand the adaptive part first. Okay. I've had a lot of clients that have puncturing non-suicidal self-injuries. For some reason, webbing seems to be a popular one. For Monica, it was the webbing of her fingers. For another person I worked with for a long time, a teenager, she would puncture the webbing between her toes with a screwdriver. But nobody would ever see that. Okay, so I was the only one in her life that knew that and knew how it helped her get through a day at times. Okay. All right. What else? Just responses overall. Mm-hmm.
And the terrible, I'm going to do this is what you don't do. My maternal instinct said, oh, I'm going to call her parents. Because, come on, they love her. They're going to support her. So I would do all the things you're not supposed to do, right? I would go in with the hug. I would do all that, which is absolutely your first thought to see what to do.
And knowing that instinct is absolutely imperative.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to do it.
Right.
If even that self-disclosure, say, oh my gosh, I'm so mad for you that you're alone in this. I want to call your mom, and I know that's not going to be supportive. You can say that. At least you're empathizing with the loneliness. Yeah. How about just personal reactions reading the story? Thinking about this as a human being.
It's so heavy.
Like what, so as an unlicensed professional, because that's not what I do, like what is the next step? So I struggle, I'm a head coach of a college softball program. I have 20.
I played college softball. We should talk.
And so I have an open door policy, which means I'm very grateful to have that relationship, but I have 15 students who come in at the beginning of every semester and just like very heavy stuff like this.
Yes, yes.
And I don't always know. Really, I'm like, how can I help you? What do you need right now?
Yeah.
Here's like our professional, you know, on campus. But for me, like that's hard because I'm gonna have to do that every year. And so I don't really. That's what weighs. So like to me, I'm like, oh yeah, a good friend. Well, that's like my whole team.
Yeah, definitely. Great question, by the way. So when I say lean in without jumping to, this is what you have to do, this is what you have to do next, the referrals are definitely available and they should be offered. We should have follow-up. We're able to make that initial appointment. What's going on now? Has anything gotten better? What I'm talking about here, and hopefully this will be the takeaway, is can you sit still with somebody like Monica and see them for even 5 minutes without jumping to what have you done to try to fix this? That will release this emotive energy that actually changes and saves lives. Okay, to say, I see you, I'm not afraid of your pain. I'm not a licensed person, I'm not a counselor. here are other resources. I want you to have more support, but I'm able to tolerate just your humanness right now. Okay. So this part here, I don't want to kill myself, so that's indicating not a current intent. I do sometimes wonder what it would be like to be gone and be free from all of this. Indicates which one of those terms?
Ambiguity.
Yeah, she's ambiguous about death, but not intending to die. So this to me is not an emergent situation, but can we tolerate the adaptive function of the puncturing, the loneliness of the family separation, even for 5 minutes, 10 minutes? And that's a long day if all 15 are coming through. I get it. Yeah.
Well, and I kind of think about the layers too of like the feelings that Monica must be going through too, because of I can see like the frustration and resentment for now being a caretaker and the change in the relationship with her partner, and then also whatever the details were with the impaired driving accident and whether there's anger associated with that, and then the lack of support from parents as well. I feel like there's so much to what she's going through, and so much that's been compounded on top of it, that there's just, I could understand how she probably crying or being able to just talk about it would be the most helpful, because I'm sure she doesn't even know where to begin with how she's feeling moment to moment.
And that's where you get a lot of this. Just seeing, like, holy crap, I don't know how you're even standing in front of me right now. Even that has empathy with it, because you're acknowledging that it is that heavy. And that's something that would be very challenging.
Yeah, that's the part that makes me sad, is I think that this story happens a lot, but very often you get to the part where you meet for lunch and that part doesn't happen. Where like the rest of like the acknowledging, or like, I can't actually see you, but the lady in the back was saying, like, I have an open door policy. I think that we are all going to do our best to have that also, but this implies that we have to do so much to like see people. And my sadness is in that we won't see people do this.
I'm going to offer a reframe. I don't think we have to do more, I think we have to do less. Okay? And I'm going to add context to that. Your instinct to fix pain is going to be very natural. You're going to jump in, how you doing? And oh my gosh, let's go do this. Or the basketball game's on tonight. Something like that. And you're going to be trying to help and fix, rather than letting all that down and just looking at somebody and saying, I see how happy this is. What do you need right now? Is actually doing less in a more empathetic way. But it's our instinct to want to be able to be that helper in that person. So I agree with both. Monica's okay. We're Facebook friends. We don't live in the same area anymore. She's okay. Still with Rachel. And they're happy. It was a dark couple of years, but they're okay. And a resolution is a big deal when I give these talks. Finding out what happens at the end. When I mentioned that they're safe people, or they're real people. I love this quote from Brene Brown. I call her my spirit animal, even though she's not an animal. Everything she's ever said or read or written is my favorite. But she says, everyone has a story or a struggle that will break your heart. And if we're really paying attention, most people have a story that will bring you to your knees. Okay, so thinking about that. The stories in the room right now. We don't know them all. But can we take the time to know one person at a time, a little bit further than what we know at this very juncture? So, you can tell it's passionate about me. I get teared up when I read Brene Brown.